The Clergy Project is a discrete online community of forums and resources for current or former clergy who no longer believe in any of the supernatural.
Hello. I hope you
Hi.
can hear me. Finally,
Yeah, finally. How are you?
I won't complain. It's just a storm outside. When I look up over there, I can see a storm.
Oh, wow.
It's probably going to be very cold here.
So
Yeah, no.
where are you located?
In Hermanus, in the Western Cape,
Oh,
in
okay.
South Africa. It's a very well-known location for whale watching.
Have you always lived
I,
there?
no, I moved here in 2001. I grew up in a little village, well, outside the little village called Ashton, on a farm. So my grandfather and my father, they were all farmers. And we had 4 farms, 3 outside Ashton and 1 outside Montague, just a few kilometers from there. So my dad retired, I think it was 2020 or 2019 he retired. So we cut off the farming history of our family.
So how was your family involved in church too? Did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in a Dutch Reformed church. In fact, my grandfather was involved in building the Dutch Reformed Church of Ashton. And of course, when we moved to Robertson, most of my primary school, secondary school, and high school, I grew up in the Dutch Reformed Church in Robertson. And that's where everything started in 1993. So I had quite an experience. What I thought back then was a supernatural experience, but I have since discovered that it was not as supernatural as I thought it was back then.
What was
And
that
so,
experience?
well, yeah, it's if I remember correctly, in 1993, the 6th of November was a Saturday morning, and I had a lot of as young teenagers are, they've got issues, issues with their family, issues with friends, issues with life, not sure what's the purpose of everything. So I was at the point where I tried to commit suicide twice, and then one day I decided, if God exists, he must be at the church. So I actually walked a few blocks to the Dutch Reformed Dominie's house, and I asked him if I may have the keys. Anyway, so I went to the church on that Saturday morning, and I was there, and I had kind of a fight with God, like, if you exist, why you're hiding, why don't you show yourself, that type of thing. And I had an emotional breakdown, and I experienced what I know today is known as auditory hallucinations. So, but for me at that stage, it was very real. And so from that moment on, my whole life changed around. And I was a missionary with Operation Mobilization for a while in Gazinkulu on the border. And I started joining what we used to have it's kind of a junior a Christian movement for high school students. And I joined that, and I became a group leader. And then
I know exactly what you mean. I was a part of something very similar called Master's Commission.
Yeah. So that was the thing. So my whole life started turning around religion, and I wanted to be, the best theologian I could be, the best pastor I could be, the best person to change the world, because I looked at the world and it was filled with hypocrisy and double standards and hatred and all these things. And I thought, I'm going to be the person to change that. And I think actually, before I went to Bible school, when I was living in Paarl, I started my first church along with 2 other pastors. And it's after that, when things didn't work out there, that I actually decided to go to Bible school and qualify myself and get into ministry properly. Then for a while after that, I had a home cell at my house after Bible school. And I worked for a Christian radio station as a continuity presenter. And then about 2-3 years after that, me and my brother, we started our own computer company. And so what I did is, up until about 5 years ago, I had a business that I ran, but I also worked as an apologist. I also did radio debates and stuff like that. So I was more of a tent maker.
You said that you went to Bible college around 2003, and then you were involved with your brother for a few more years.
Yes.
So at what point, and what did your ministry look like? What were you all involved in when you started to become skeptical and you started to realize that this wasn't right for you? And I don't want to elaborate on that. I guess, what, on top of that, what was it that started to make you not buy into it anymore?
I had a keen interest in Bible contradictions, or alleged Bible contradictions. I was surrounded by people which I didn't know were atheists. And one of them was a very good friend, and he's still a very good friend. And he specifically would ask me questions. He'll come to me and say, well, I ran into this in the Bible and I don't understand this, and it seems to contradict this other passage. And I was wondering if you've got an answer for me.
So they were very subtle about it. They weren't open about their atheism. They just started asking you questions.
Yes. So what I did is I would look at these supposed contradictions, these difficulties, and it would normally take me 2-3 weeks, and I'll answer them, and then I'll hand him the document, and then he'll go like, well, fair enough, I see your point. And then a few weeks or a month go past, and then he'll come to me and says, well, I've got this question. I ran into this the other day. Do you perhaps have an answer for this? And then I'll start looking at that. And at one stage, he climbed on a plane and he went to Russia because he was teaching in Moscow. And so while he was away, I decided I'm going to do some proper research into the whole issues surrounding biblical errancy and biblical inerrancy. And so one night I was busy looking through all the scribal errors and setting out my framework for my research and stuff. And the first place I started was, where's the original manuscript of the Bible? Because in Bible school, we were led to believe that there were an original. And I looked at this, and then I discovered, to my dismay, that there were no original. That all we had were thousands of copies. And in between them, there were thousands of discrepancies. And so I started to try and resolve the discrepancies, and I realized that there were some of these discrepancies which I couldn't resolve. They were impossible to resolve. And then my research developed, and of course that coincided with my divorce. Literally in the same week, my wife lost her battle with drug addiction. And so during that same week, I lost my faith. And it pulled the mat from under me in ways that I cannot explain to anybody. The depression, my whole life was flipped upside down. You know, she left. That was a heartbreaking experience in its own. And then what I would usually fall back on, I couldn't fall back on because it was no longer there. So I had to rebuild. I had to start rebuilding my whole life from the bottom up. I had to find new purpose. And back then I ran a very successful, very popular website, Christian website. And I was involved in various debates with various other online Christian ministries throughout the country. Some of them, if you Google my name, you will still find their responses to me. And so I sat down, I wrote them all letters, explaining to them my new position, and that I'm no longer part of this discussion, and that I'm pulling out of it. And then, of course, all the backlash came because they had a field day. They really enjoyed that.
I bet so.
But anyway, so yeah, that was, so I decided eventually after a few months, I decided now it's time to take my website down, which I did. And it's only about 3 weeks ago that I made a decision to relaunch the website, to review all the content, and to publish all the research I've done since to help other people.
And you've kind of given me a little bit of a look into some of the stuff that you're going to put on there in the research. And also I saw the layout of your website, and it is really awesome. Looks like there's a lot of work that went into it and years of research, and you have it laid out so nicely to where, like you were telling me yesterday, if somebody's wanting to look into some of these things, they could go to your website once it's launched, and it's a nice central location to just look at all of these different categories of the flaws of the Bible and all of the contradictions, and you have it broken down by categories.
Yes, what I intend to do is I intend to save people time, because I remember how lost I was trying to find this of the Bible contradictions that I found. More than 90% isn't contradictions, and so it's not very helpful. Those online lists really, I found that very confusing. In fact, those lists kept me in my religion much longer than I should have stayed. If I looked at those difficulties and I saw, well, this is a clear contradiction, it would have pulled the mat out of me much earlier. But unfortunately, most of the stuff I looked at weren't contradictions. So after a time, you start thinking to yourself, well, if these things are all so easy to answer, then maybe they're just wasting my time. And so what I'm trying to do with the new website is to clearly distinguish between what is Bible difficulties and what is Bible contradictions. And also to look at them, to look at the suggested solutions to those difficulties, and to look whether those answers are really answers or whether they are not as solid as the person thought. So that's why my website is divided into theological section. It's divided into a philosophical section that explains a lot of philosophical concepts to help people to think for themselves. Things like arguments from popularity, arguments from authority. It's things that people do every single day in a myriad of subjects because they don't understand how fallacious it is. And so I'm trying to make a one-stop solution where people can go and they can see how these things work, how you can recognize them easily, a kind of a layman's introduction to these subjects. Yeah,
I think that is super awesome. I'm going to use it myself, when you have it up and going. Is, so I will make sure that I'll put that in the description of the video too. So, and then I'll make sure that I put it in there when you have it completely launched and everything. But it is very good information. There's a lot there. I know one of the things that, at first I kept coming across, there's 50,000 errors in the Bible, and then realizing that a lot of those errors really are legitimately just small, insignificant errors too. So I think that is good to kind of distinguish what are the actual contradictions, what are the big major things that we need to look at in the doctrine.
Yeah, it also helps me. I'm also producing this and putting all this together for myself to use within debates, for instance. So that, I don't want to waste somebody's debate in a discussion with things that we can easily answer. I want to spend my time on the things that's really valuable and the things that really leaves them with big questions. And there are some serious issues. There's some serious Bible contradictions. There are some serious theological contradictions. There are some serious philosophical contradictions. And all of those things I'm trying to document in an easy to understand way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super exciting. I can't wait till that's up. That
Also
will really help out a lot of people.
A lot of this I also do for my daughter, of course, because she's only 13. Mm-hmm. And you never know. I could die in 2 years. I could die tomorrow, and then there's nothing that I've left for her. So a lot of my writing and this video, this interview we're doing now, I'm doing for her. I'm doing so that one day she can look back on it and she can get some answers to some of the questions she has.
Yeah, that's awesome. I understand that. I have a 12-year-old, and her dad is a pastor. She's actually with him right now. So he stayed in it. I did not. And so it's nice to be able to, and totally different, to be raising a child secularly and teaching them how to think. And she follows me on all my social media stuff and likes all my stuff.
Dad is probably not too happy about that.
Nope. But I don't know. I would much rather the truth and just being open and honest about everything.
Yeah, it's like I've been thinking about this interview, and where I live in South Africa, this type of thing will be sent around, and there will be a major backlash against me as a person for doing this. But I think we do need to do this. I think we need to have these discussions, especially in this country. In this country, you guys are lucky. You've got hundreds of former ministers and major atheistic personalities like Sam Harris, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Christopher Hitchens, which is now deceased. A lot of these people, Dan Barker, I love his personality, his kindness. A lot of people
really?
here in South Africa, there's very little of that. In fact, there is nothing that I know of. There's one or two so-called atheist kind of get-togethers at universities, but it's not open to outside people. So, I'm trying to establish that. I'm trying to get those people together. And so what I'm now going to do on the website as well, I'm going to create profiles for the ones I find. And so they can be introduced to each other, so they can meet with each other. I've had a get-together in Cape Town with one former Dutch Reformed dominee a few months ago. So things like that. We need that type of thing in South Africa. There's
what kind of backlash do you get? Do you get dangerous backlash, or can you?
To give you a simple example, Trevor Noah, he comes from South Africa. Now, Trevor Noah he expressed his view on religion in one of his shows. Now, that little clip was captured, and that little clip has been shared by thousands of people in South Africa via WhatsApp, sending it around. People who threaten that if they find him in the street, they're going to beat him up and that type of thing. It's very closed-minded, close-minded. You also have that in the US. I mean, one can just look on television, January 6th insurrection and stuff like that. Some crazies in every country.
I know, but there are. I finally just met another group of atheists for the first time. It was last weekend, and it was really nice because, after being a part of church for so long, and then you walk away from it, it's hard to walk away from it, and it's heartbreaking because the community of it and genuinely loving all the people that you were a part of the church with. And so when you walk away from that, sometimes you can keep connection and friendships with some of the people, but sometimes people have a very hard time with the lack of faith And so that relationship becomes severed. And so being able to talk with other like-minded people now on this side of it feels so nice, because it's, you know, it's been lonely for a long time. And I'm sure, you know, you can identify with that. Having walked away, you walk away from your community too. And you don't want to walk away from your community. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, quite a few of my friends cut all communications, you know, blocked on Facebook, all those type of things. And then, of course, because that coincided with my divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a very, very lonely time. But I have grown used to that. And luckily for myself, I am kind of a bit of a loner, so I am perfectly happy sitting at home doing research, going to see my clients, spending time with my daughter. And I do have some very good friends, including Christian friends. My daughter's got Christian friends, she's got Muslim friends, and I encourage her to be friends with them. And they clearly know where she stands, and she accepts them. And the only time she kind of has the same approach than I have. I don't care what you believe until that belief starts affecting other people. So it's fine if you choose to believe something, but if you start telling other people they also have to believe that, or they also have to perform according to your wishes or to your God's wishes or your will, then I'm going to have a problem. And especially if you go around, you know, if you become homophobic, go around insulting people, and that's normally where I will step in and say, listen, now you've walked far enough, now we're going to have a discussion.
It's far different when the beliefs are causing harm for other humans, other people. But if there's something beautiful about being able to look past the differences, being friends with other people that are believers. If you have the same goals in life, if you see the value in other humans and not oppressing other people, you know, you can have the same goals and different beliefs.
The irony for me is that whenever they want to fact check stuff, I'm the one they contact. I find that so funny. And when they've got Bible questions, I'm the one they contact. So the irony.
That's great, though.
So
because they probably know you're going to look at it objectively.
Yeah, probably. So
what does your life look like now? How long have you been out? Has it been?
It's now the March. It was exactly 5 years.
My dogs are coming over to say hi.
I see. I just
March of
this year.
This year?
Yeah, actually, it's 6 years. It was 6 years, March of this year. I've been out of it now for 6 years, and currently, of course, me and my brother had this computer business running in Hermanus, and we are doing. We've got a lot of business, a lot of clients, and we've built up the business over many years. So I was a teacher for a while, high school teacher at a private high school here in Hermanus for 5 years. I was teaching IT for grade 10, 11, and 12, Java programming, database administration, and IT theory. So currently now I'm just in my business. We also have a mobile app that we're busy developing. And so we're bringing out a new version soon. And then I'm also busy qualifying myself as a full stack developer for its web applications. You will probably have noticed that a lot of the software is going online, like Microsoft Office is becoming a web-based application, Google Docs, Gmail is an online email client. So a lot of the software are moving online, and there's a shortage of developers, and the money is very good, and I can live anywhere in the world. So that's what I'm busy doing at the moment. And
that's super awesome. Did you do that before you left the ministry?
No,
Or
no.
did you get involved after?
I did web design before I left the ministry, of course. I was capable of doing web design, but not on the level that a full stack developer would be able to develop full-blown applications and database-driven software and solutions and stuff like that. So it's something I'm putting my mind to now. One of my friends and two of my former students are full-time, full-stack developers. So doors are opening for me in that direction as well. So at some stage, we will probably sell our IT business, and we've been looking at the US. We've also been looking at Canada. We've been looking at New Zealand. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, the US is great, but don't come here. I mean, yeah, like physically. I'm just kidding. I was just joking. We were just joking yesterday, like, things are getting bad. I think I want to get out of this country.
Yeah, no, I must say my daughter's also, she says, Dad, if you look at this Donald Trump presidency, I don't think we should go there.
No, I know. Going back to, you know, your days that you were part of Operation Mobilization, and then prior to that, you know, growing up in church, you mentioned that when you went to college, it was a charismatic college. I'm assuming evangelical, Pentecostal, right?
It was actually, I'm not sure whether you are familiar with the modern apostolic Reformation movement. It is kind of just came after the charismatic movement. It's got nothing to do with the old and new apostolic church. It's got to do with this whole reestablishment of the apostolic ministry in the church, as a whole new structure, a more New Testament structure to the church. And so the main guy there is a guy known as Andre Helser. And he's a well-known person in South Africa. He and his wife used to host a television show known as Kruis en Kroniek. It's a Sunday kind of a religious show. And then there's a person which you're probably more familiar with, is a guy known as Richard van der Berg. And he's the producer of the Jesus film. And the well-known Jesus film, he's the producer, and the film, the Bible school I was at, Miracle Bible College, back then it was known as Life of Christ Bible Institute, and they had a drama and film school under the auspices of Richard. So that is, that's in Cape Town. They're still functioning there. It's known as Harvester International Ministries.
What was your prayer and worship like? How charismatic was it?
A lot like, they were linked with a lot of these charismatic type people. Not so much, I'm trying to remember, Reinhard Bonke, for instance, Andy Lamb, those type of people. It was close to the type of worship you would expect at a Jimmy Swaggart or a Benny Hinn or a Kenneth Copeland type ministry.
So a lot of laying on of hands, speaking in tongues,
miracles,
slain in the spirit, miracles. Yeah.
There's one instance that I will never forget. It was in our final year at Bible school. There was this prophecy. David Copperfield, he's a well-known illusionist. You probably know who he is. So he was visiting Cape Town, and so there was these prophecies going out that when David Copperfield is coming here, God said his show is going to be a failure because his witchcraft is not going to be allowed to work in Cape Town. Now, for somebody like me who knows how he does what he does, and I already knew how he does what he does back then, because I always had an interest, even though I was a Christian, even though I was more in a charismatic side of the churches, I was reformed in my doctrine. And so I was a Calvinist. I was a Reformed Calvinist.
Okay.
And the irony is I was a Reformed Calvinist in a kind of a charismatic Pentecostal Bible school, but my best friend at that time was more charismatic charismatic Pentecostal, but he was at a Reformed Bible school. Exactly the opposite. But anyway, so I always investigated people like Benny Hinn, all the claims, and Kenneth Copeland, Jesse Duplantis, those type of people. And I wrote publicly, I wrote against their ministries. I explained what they're doing, how mesmerism works. Even as a Christian apologist and as a Christian pastor, I knew they were scoundrels. And so when they made that prophecy at Bible school, I immediately, it stuck with me, and I went forward and I bought the tape recording so that I had the evidence that that prophecy was made. And so the time came and David Copperfield visited, and his show was a huge success. Nobody, not a single student, ever questioned that prophecy. No one. And things like that, it's always stuck with me throughout the years. These prophecies that people make, these claims that they make of people rising from the dead. I've investigated a lot of those things, and that's all lies. It's all lies. That's literally the only way.
Even the ones actually in the Bible too. None of them were actually fulfilled.
But things like in the Old Testament, the pharaohs, sorcerers changing their stick into a snake. It's something which illusionists can do today, and which they do today. Mm-hmm. So it's most of this changing water into wine. I know how that's done. Walking on water, I know how that's done. So
there are people on YouTube and stuff, even within the atheist community, I suppose, that actually show how these are done, and even things done within churches to show how this is just kind of like a scam. Sometimes it is with the bigger, the televangelists, the ones that are going after money. I don't mean that in a general way.
No. In general, most Christians, in my opinion, they're really honest about what they're doing. They really believe that it's really heartfelt. And most of them are just being conned by guys like Benny Hinn and Kenneth Copeland. More specifically, a better example is probably Peter Popoff. James Randi. James Randi caught Peter Popoff. He and his wife, he had a little microphone in his ear.
Somebody else mentioned that. I didn't know much about it, but somebody said you need to look into that, because that was showing that, keep going. You know it better than I do.
So basically what James did is James walked into this show, and he had a recording device on him, which was scanning for signals. And he scanned, and during the show, he picked up a signal, and he heard a voice, and he heard Peter Popoff's wife giving him all the tips. And then Peter Popoff simultaneously standing on the stage, telling people God told him, and prophesying over people, and having these amazing insight into people's lives. In the meantime, it's his wife sitting outside in the parking lot, feeding him the information from little cards, visitor cards, which people filled in before the show. And it led to his the demise of his ministry back then, but he's now back at it. He's conning thousands of people again. He's doing exactly the same thing again, and he's getting away with it again. Unfortunately, people like to be fleeced.
I know. So it's like, you have to be careful what you do with your money financially, and where this money is actually going. That's a little bit different than, trying to pray and hope that God's answering your prayers. But then for somebody to actually contribute financially and think that they're going to get something in return, that's scary.
It's one thing to give people false hope for something like they want a better job or whatever, and we're going to pray for it. It's a completely different matter if you tell people, listen, you've got a deadly disease, stop using your medication, we're just going to pray for you, it's going to solve your problem. that is, there's no words for that. That is the evil. That's literally evil.
It is.
And then to take that person's money on top of that, conning them out of their money while you're also conning them right into death. Yeah, that's why people like me do what we do. That's why we address these people. I mean, I've had multiple legal threats over the years. They yet have to win one, but you have to do something.
That's good to know. I did recently have one, so that's good to know. I'm gonna edit that out. Actually,
I'll tell you my technique. I'll share that with you in private.
Okay.
Are you still there?
I mean, I think when especially some of these, it's back now. The internet kind of blipped out. I think it's really scary with some of these people that are scamming is how much of a following they're getting, especially with the internet now, how much of a following they're getting financially and how much their thoughts are infiltrating the government, at least here in the US. I don't know what it's like there.
Yeah, the people here as well, you know, they share all these videos via WhatsApp. I recently responded to a testimony by a local evangelist that's been spread on WhatsApp. Everyone spreads it to everyone as the truth. So I analyzed this. I literally typed out the whole testimony from the video. I analyzed all the claims. I phoned the newspapers. I phoned the prison. I phoned the detectives in the town. I spoke to everyone and discovered that this guy is a complete fraud and he's lying about almost 80% of his testimony. He claims to have been shot multiple times. He claims that the bullets were divinely pushed out of his body. And he claims, here's the best part. Here's the best part. He claims that the two people who shot him are in prison. But
that worked.
Exactly. Based on what? Because there's no evidence that he was ever shot. A lot of these things, but it seems like when it comes to religion, it's like people never apply their logic. It's like they don't question it. And the irony is that even the Bible says, don't believe everything you hear. Even the Bible says, listen, there's going to be people making false prophecies amongst you. Even the Bible says, be careful of those who's going to fleece you. And that's why even in my Christian days, I was wake up about those type of things. I didn't realize that this barrel I was caught in itself was a deception. But I saw a lot of the deception inside the barrel. So, you know, we call it discernment. That's something which that's something which in the church they talk a lot about, but they rarely apply. They rarely question things.
Yes.
That's sad.
I kind of wanted to talk about your days with Operation Mobilization. I went to look at what their website looked like now, and I thought this was kind of interesting, you know, because these days I look at, you know, proselytizing and evangelizing in such a different way than I did back then. But their website currently says that our vision is to catalyze 25,000 vibrant communities of Jesus followers every year by 2030. And yes, that's on the US site. So the US Operation Mobilization, but I know I was in a very similar program where it's like college age and they recruit you and you evangelize, and it's basically recruitment to become a missionary.
Yes.
And we did, you were mentioning dramas. We did dramas, and we did them when we would go to the different churches or when we would minister. Did you guys put basically a whole church service together when you would travel and then try to recruit more students for the next year?
It was short-term. It was short-term missions. So what happened is we were put on a train in Worcester, and then we were taken to Pretoria. And then at Pretoria, we were taken to a training center where we were taught the language, the Shangaan language. practices. You know what? Now
Your
internet
internet's
is cutting out
blinking
again.
out for a second.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly make sure that my brother is not on the internet. I expressly asked him not to be. I'm just going to make sure we've got fiber in South Africa, so it should be fast. It's strange that it's cutting out. I'm just going to make sure that he hasn't forgotten. I'll be within a sec.
Okay. Andy, is that you? I took the opportunity to check on my dogs. I have a new puppy, so.
Yes, my baby. There's my baby.
Oh, cute.
He's my baby boy. Anyway,
new husky dog.
Yeah, so Operation Mobilization, basically what they do is in South Africa back then, they would go to the local churches. They will canvass from the local churches young people to do missionary outreaches for them. They put you on a train to Pretoria, from Pretoria onto an OM training station base, where you will be taught the basic language, how to greet people, and ask, interact with them. And then you were told what you're not allowed to do. Cultural things, like for instance, amongst the Shangaan people, you're not allowed, only men are allowed to use the front door. And women use the right-hand door to the house, and the children use the left-hand entrance to the house. And that is a thing. Also, when you get inside the house,
I know whose shoes these are because it's by this door. You better pick these up.
And only men were allowed to sit on chairs.
Only men are allowed to sit on chairs? Women have to sit on what? Yes,
the women and children sit on the floor. It's their culture. Anyway, so
but you have to learn these things and then follow them, obviously, to be respectful.
Yeah, to be respectful and not to upset the status quo. And then after 2 weeks of training, then they send you to one of the missionary bases where you spend a month at a time. So I think it was a month and a half at a time to evangelize you. We built a school. We built little houses. We interacted with the medical people and issues with children and stuff. There's a lot of witchcraft in the place I was at. This was the first place in my life that I actually, when I got there was these drums playing the whole time, and we could hear them. And it's apparently the Sangomas, the witch doctors, they weren't happy that we were there. So things like that puts a lot of credibility on what we're doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
they're scared that we're here, so they're trying to do their rituals because our God is powerful.
Yeah, the devil is shaking in his boots. So that's where we went. And I remember from that particular outing is about a week or so before the end of that mission trip, we ran out of food. So we had to catch grasshoppers. I remember we had those little Coke tins, when the tin is empty, it's got a little hole at the top. So you would catch the grasshoppers, put them in the tin, keep your thumb on there, and we'll catch a ton of them. And then we'll fry them like in a pan, and we'll eat them. And so they made a video. They made a video of this event. And so a few months after we got back to Robertson, where I grew up, the church had, I think, about 4,000 to 5,000 people in this hall to tell them, give them feedback about this whole mission trip and what we did there. And so during this whole event, they showed these videos of us eating the grasshoppers. And so on this video, when they gave me a grasshopper to eat, I made a joke and I said, if you can eat my mom's food, you can eat anything. And my mom and my dad were sitting next to me in the church, when they played that video in front of 5,000 people and everyone was laughing.
Did she laugh?
She just laughed. She looked at me and
Good.
she's like, get you when we get home.
That's funny. What did it taste like?
Like, you know,
Grass?
if I barbecue chicken, the skin. That's basically what it tastes like.
Oh.
Like chicken skin. It's not bad. It's actually, it's just, you know, it's a cultural thing. In South Africa, we don't eat insects. So it's something odd. But if you grew up in a different culture, it's quite normal.
Mm-hmm. I've never eaten even one bug. No way.
Well, it was an experience.
Yeah. I've known people that like eat roaches, scorpions, weird stuff like that, like in like Asian cultures and stuff. And it's like a delicacy, so they had to try it. Had to, but wanted to, had to.
It wasn't such a bad experience, but I guess, you know, if you're really hungry, you're willing to eat anything. So that's
true.
There's a lot of things when I think back to my Christian days and I think to the sacrifices I've made. And it's actually time, and there were good times like the ones I just described, you know, and things that'll stay with me for the rest of my life. And there were positive things as well. But there are things where I think to myself, wow, they stole so many years of your life. They stole so much money out of your pocket. And time. If I just think of all the hours in church services, of missionary work, of hiking between towns to do outreaches, of walking into informal settlements, into shacks. Now, those things, I don't feel like it was a waste of time. I feel specifically about the shack. I was also a labor minister at one stage. I would drive out to farms and I would stop my vehicle on the farm near to the farmer's house, and I would walk through the fields and visit each one of the farm laborers' little houses and counsel with them and have discussions with them. And I've seen some horrible living conditions, you know, where you literally have a room where you've got the mother and the father sleeping in the one corner, the kids sleeping in the other corner, a table in the other corner, and a fireplace. There's no water in the house, no warm water, no electricity, nothing. Even in the winter, they have to walk 40, 50 meters to go wash themselves in a dam. So things like that was good for me to experience, to see, because it brings a certain level of thankfulness for what you have.
Mm-hmm. And humbleness.
And it made me realize that there's more to life than just things. It's about
It was
people.
always beautiful to meet people from different cultures that didn't have nearly as much, and I always felt like they were such beautiful, happy people that had such full lives. And I mean, aside from the religion thing, I totally agree, you know, going and meeting people and it just being simple, just meeting new people from different parts of the world. And I had a similar situation like that, kind of what you were talking about, where we went and visited people deep into Mexico, and they had never seen Americans before or anything. At the time, my hair was a lot more blonde, so definitely not a blonde white girl, you know. And so it was really cool because I had never been to Mexico before or anything either. So it was new for me, it was new for them, and they were so thankful that we were there. And they didn't really have much food to feed us or anything. So they had 3 pigs. They had killed one of their pigs, which I would imagine was probably a lot of money for them. And they had a huge pot over fire and had all sorts of pig parts in there with seasoning and water. And so, I mean, they were so happy to give this to us. They were only giving us as much as we wanted before they were having other people eat it. And so obviously I was like eating as much as I could because they were so happy to share that with us. And
we had kind of a similar experience in Gazankulu. When we finished there, they were very thankful for the school and for the little houses we built and stuff. So they decided also they wanted to give us all a meal. So what we got was a plate with rice and then like a quarter chicken leg. But because knives and forks and stuff doesn't exist in their culture, when you get the chicken leg, the claws are still on the chicken. so as you can imagine, the girls all freaked out, and so we had to tell them, listen, just eat it, be thankful. It's expensive for for them. It's a huge expense, and
do not let on that this seems unappealing to you.
Yes, exactly. And so I joked. I said, listen, the chicken comes with its own toothpicks, so you should be thankful. Things like that.
So okay, so I have a couple other specific questions.
Good.
So, well, okay. So specifically, when you were there and you started questioning, I know we were talking earlier about your website and the interaction that you had with that other guy that was asking you those questions, which, by the way, I want to add in, I like that approach that he had. That was cool. Where he was asking you questions and you would get back with him a few weeks later and didn't really let on that he was an atheist. That's a pretty cool approach. I think I might try that with people.
Yeah.
But I was curious, what were some of the specific things that caused you to realize this isn't exactly what you thought it was? Like Jesus, hell, resurrection, blood.
You will remember that I said that I looked into the issue of biblical inerrancy, biblical errancy. And so, of course, I started at the start. I first started with the doctrine of inspiration. So I properly understand all the various views surrounding the doctrine of inspiration. Then I did a study following on that about God's providence in protecting his own words so that it will not be corrupted or fall away. So I had the study that God inspired it, and then I had the study that God promised to protect what he inspired. And then I started looking, okay, so, and then I started looking at where's the original? And as I said, I discovered to my dismay, there was no original. And then I started looking and I saw, oh, well, there's only copies with all these hundreds of differences. And then I discovered that some of the newer copies had less mistakes than some of the older copies. And then I thought to myself, let me check. Is there missing words of God? Are there literally, because you can argue, for instance, a lot of the biblical inerrantists, they argue that despite the fact that some of the words were corrupted, we can still discover them because of other passages of scripture. So if there's a numbers mistake, here it says that he was 18 when he became the king, and here it says he was 8 when he became king, then, well, obviously, God still protected his word because the correct age was still in the Bible. So we could discover the error due to the correct one that's still retained. But to get past that, I started looking into the so-called lost words of God. So I discovered that throughout the Old Testament, it talks about various prophets and their works. And it also the Bible refers to these works of these prophets as authoritative and as coming from God. But here's the kicker. All those books are missing, lost, gone. One of those books, the Mormons, the Mormons claim to have one of those books, which is a forgery. And I've sufficiently demonstrated it is a forgery, and most people know it's a forgery. So that leaves us in a bind, because we have a God who says he inspired his words, he will protect his words, yet it's missing. That's a huge problem. And then I started looking, of course, well, okay, I have all these alleged Bible contradictions, and started working through them one after the other. And then I discovered, no, this I can answer, this I can answer, this I can answer. And then suddenly I hop on one where there is, I literally try to answer them. I have no vested interest. I'm not so hell-bent on condemning Christianity that I'm willing to grasp at straws. I want to know that this is really a Bible contradiction. And so I'm literally trying. I've actually been accused by some atheists for being an undercover Christian for answering their Bible difficulties. But the fact is, if we are going to claim that Bible difficulties are Bible contradictions, and then it turns out that they can answer us, it is going to draw a fat line through our credibility. And that's why they don't take us seriously. Mm-hmm. And I heard a very good term 2 days ago. It's a term, the term preschool theology. And unfortunately, some people have a kind of a preschool theology. Some Christians and even some atheists, unfortunately. They will say things like, and preschool theology is this. You ask the kid, does your mom love you? And she says, of course my mom loves me. And then you say, yeah, but hasn't she yelled at you yesterday? And then she says, yeah, but she says she loves me, but she yells at me. So I guess she doesn't really love me. And that type of argument they sometimes make with Bible difficulties to make it look like a contradiction. And that's unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I'm trying to wade through all the nonsense and get to the gold nuggets. What's really valuable and useful, and then to spend a lot of time on those gold nuggets, to delineate them, to check the counter arguments, to answer the counter arguments, and then to make it available in a readable format. It doesn't help you and me. We understand certain terms. We understand what is meant by dispensationalism. We understand what's meant by soteriology. We understand what's hermeneutics. We understand all the big words. But the problem is the people outside there who needs that information doesn't. They don't understand those words. So you have to bring it down to an understandable level. It's like Einstein said, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't know it well enough.
Yep.
And that's what I'm trying to do. To dumb it down so anyone can understand the logic. So yeah.
Yeah, that is great. I like how your reasoning is super logical. You basically just read the Bible more. You tried to be the best Christian you could and the best apologist, and pretty much sounds like you still are. You know, you're still, even though your beliefs have changed on the whole belief system, you are still looking into these things because you want to converse with other theists in a more thorough way.
Exactly.
To understand their arguments better.
How can you answer somebody? I've had people who ask me recently, so why you're an atheist? Why bother? Why waste your time on Bible study? When I was a young Christian, I was very confused at one stage, because if I go to the Dutch Reformed Church, they tell me one thing, and then I go to the AFM and they tell me another thing, and then I go to the Philadelphia Church and they tell me another thing. And then I had a run-in with the Seventh-day Adventists, and they tell me another thing. So I got pretty confused about all these different views. And so after a while, what happened first is I grew up in the Dutch Reformed Church, which teaches infant baptism. And so through my own Bible study and stuff, I came to the conclusion back then, at the age of 17, that credo baptism, that is believers' baptism, is a more accurate interpretation of the Bible. So in matric, in our final year, you get presented in front of the church, and then all the young people, you have to appear in church, and you kind of, it's this almost like a thing of allegiance that you pledge to the church and to their doctrines and everything. And so I had a crisis of conscience. So I went to the one Dutch Reformed Dominee, the pastor, and I discussed it with him. And I told him, like, listen, I have this issue, crisis of conscience. I cannot stand there and lie. And so he told me, this will always stay with me. He says to me, you are correct. He says, what you believe, I know, is also the truth. And I was shocked, because here's this elderly Dutch Reformed minister telling me that believers' baptism is the biblical interpretation as opposed to infant baptism. And then I asked him about it, and he says the only reason why he's not coming out is because his pension was 2 or 3 years away. And so he gave me some books and so on. So after that event and all this confusion about doctrines and what everyone teaches,
was he an atheist?
No, he just didn't believe that his particular denominations doctrines were correct. Mm-hmm. He believed that they were in error, but he knew back then, if he spoke out, 1994, if he spoke out, he would lose his pension. Mm-hmm. And so things like that stuck with me. And eventually I kind of became a bit of a Christian rebel. I pulled myself out of all the churches, and I spent my days, I would get home from school, I would go straight to my room, do my schoolwork, and then spend the rest of my day in Bible study. I analyzed everything I could get my hands on. I went to see people from different religions and different viewpoints, and I even visited some Freemasons back then. And then I discovered that I could do correspondence courses. So I did correspondence courses with the Seventh-day Adventists. I did correspondence courses with the Dutch Reformed Church. I did correspondence courses with the Baptists, and so on. And the reason why I'm telling you all of this is because what you just said earlier is I wanted to know firsthand, why do they believe what they believe? I didn't accept what the Dutch Reformed Church said of the AFM, and I didn't accept what the Apostolic Faith Mission had to say about Dutch Reformed. I wanted to know firsthand, where in their books do they say it, and is that a correct representation of what they're saying? Because people misrepresent each other, especially religions. They love to misrepresent each other. And that's how I learned. I wanted to know, and I wanted to know firsthand information. Because
did it cause you any confusion with the fact that there were so many denominations, that there were so many different interpretations of the same thing? Like, how could this be inerrant or infallible if so many people are interpreting this one thing differently?
Well, of course, what I did is I developed this technique in my research. I created what I call a pillar system. So if I look at something like baptism, for instance, I would say, okay, how many different doctrines are there surrounding this? And there's 5, for instance. Then I'll say, okay, I'll delineate each one of the 5 separately. I will create I'll create a document that says, okay, this one's pillar. Okay, I'm going to take one that's easy to do. When we look at eternal torment, that whole doctrine is based on 2 verses, basically. 2 verses that speaks of eternal fire, and that speaks of people being tortured night and day. Mm-hmm. So I could create a document on eternal torment, and I will say, okay, the first foundational argument is, here's a verse which says that people are going to burn or be tormented day and night. Right, that's the first foundational argument. What's the second one? The second one is, here is a verse that says the worms are going to eat them, but the worms will never die. That's a second foundational argument. And so I will say, I will get all 3 or 4 or 5 of their foundational pillars that upholds that particular belief. And I will analyze each one of those foundational principles. As the saying goes, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. I dispelled a lot of the things as simple, bad interpretation. So, and most of those things that were easily, they were simple to answer, they were simple to look at. I find that most people who says they cannot discern or they cannot, the internet is on. When I finished Bible school and I looked back at what I was taught in Bible school, I realized why pastors were floundering in all kinds of nonsense. The sum total of it is that people don't do their homework. They don't. Pastors, neither. I know pastors that's been in the church for 40 years. What made things a little bit different for me is I spend about 20% of my time in ministry, but I spend about 80% of my time in analytics, in biblical analytics, in Greek and Hebrew and all those type of things. Whereas most ministers spend about 20% of their time in Bible study and analytics and about 80% of their time in ministry. Mm-hmm. And that is where a lot of the nonsense comes from. Simple things. We were talking about doctrinal things and that's, I don't think you can critique something if you don't understand it. And unfortunately, there's way too many people trying to answer them without understanding first, without doing their homework. They think you can go on the internet, do a 5-minute search, find a little article that confirms your confirmation bias, and then use that. And that's why the internet is filled with people flaming at each other, and it's not useful. Earlier, we were talking about my friend who asked me these questions. And you said, you think it's a good idea. And that's what I also do. I have no interest in telling somebody what they should believe. I much rather have an interest in teaching them critical thinking. Because if there's one thing that people believe more than me and you, it is themselves. They believe themselves. So if they came to the conclusion themselves, if they can see it for themselves, then nobody's going to convince them otherwise. Okay. Anyway, so I don't know if you got that last bit.
I did. I have it recorded.
Okay. So basically, I'm trying to get people to answer themselves by asking them the right questions. And then once it clicks, then I can say to them, well, there's a website of mine. You can go get all the articles there. You can look through them. And also, I make a point of the fact that, number one, I'm not authoritative. My materials are not exhaustive. I do not say to anyone, I'm not building a fan club or a religion or a cult. So what I'm actually asking, and one of the major reasons why I put the research on the internet now, is because I want people to review it and to say, yeah, but you've missed this, or, but have you thought about this? Or somebody said this, how would you answer that? It helps me to round my research and to improve on my research, and also to better educate myself. So, yeah.
I think that's definitely the way to go. And that's how we were able to flip-flop our beliefs, going from a believer to an atheist, because we were able to say, oh, maybe I wasn't so right on that.
Exactly. That's I think that brought me down. It brought me back to earth, put my feet flat on the earth, so I can just think, because hey, you were so sure about that from the age of 16. You did all of this, you went through all of these things, and on top of that, you were trying to convince other people, and you were wrong. Yeah, that puts a little bit of a dampener on your pride.
Do you carry a lot of guilt for having spread false information?
I have thought about this quite often. And yes, of course, but I always try and remember that I was deceived as a young person at the age of 16. And that I was given just confirmation from adults, which were highly intelligent as far as I was concerned, highly educated, people who were really nice people, and people who really cared for me. And then, of course, it became a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you start educating yourself and confirming your own biases and so forth. And that's why I, as a former teacher, why I believe it's very important that we teach philosophy as a school subject, because it applies to everything. Everything. It applies to the way you interact, not just with religions and stuff, but the way you interact with politics, the way you interact with people around you, the way you interact in business.
Did you ever get caught up in racism?
So of course, I grew up in South Africa, specifically under the old South African government, the so-called Apartheid government of Paul Forster, NPA government. And of course, that was a time of a lot of upheaval. But I was, by the time the new South Africa came around, I was in grade 11. So I wasn't even finished with school. But so I kind of grew up more open and free South Africa. When I was still at school, it was whites only. Blacks at their own school, coloreds at their own school. Everyone was on their own, you know. So that's how we grew up. Yep, that's certain beaches only whites were allowed to go to, like a public swimming pools. Only whites was allowed to go to. It's a horrible time in history, and I'm actually.
So, if you don't mind me asking, I don't want to straight up ask you what your age is, but you seem really young to have gone through segregation in schools. I mean, when did that end?
1994. 1994 is when the old South Africa, you know, the segregation stopped. So yeah, wow. I finished school in 1995, high school. So it was a difficult, weird time.
I wanted to ask about your family. How much was your family a part of your entering into religion, and what was their response when you left?
That was one of my problems as a teenager. I've always been a person who sits back and I look at people, and people intrigue me, the way that people react, the way that people think and so forth. And I looked at my parents and I realized something is not right with their marriage. And they were eventually divorced. They basically waited for us to leave school, and the moment we were out of the house, they got divorced. But I saw that coming. And so, of course, in 1993, when I had that big emotional upheaval in my own life, and I wanted to know what's the purpose of life, and the depression and stuff, you know, that was part of it. And so my parents were religious in the sense that most people are, you know, they go to church on Sunday, they try to do the right thing, but they're not religious in the sense of understanding, you know, what the Bible teaches and how these verses stick into each other and what is the difference between this and that. It's not the nitty-gritty. They're like most Christians, you know, they're like just like, it's a nice idea. There was a guy, he loved us so much, he died for us, and because he loved us and because he did that, we're going to be okay when we die. That's it. That's kind of the whole thing. So then when I became a Christian, I became a really radical Christian. In fact, a lot of my friends back then asked me, at one stage they cornered me and asked me if I joined the cult. And I had to explain to them that no, I just became a real Christian. I just now take things really serious, and I now actually believe the Bible. And
no, I'm just taking you seriously now.
And then of course my parents, it was weird to them, because one moment I was this sport guy, this party animal, this outgoing socialite type, and the next moment I was this researching the Bible kind of guy, reading theology, talking to grown-ups, having interviews with grown-ups and ministers, and doing correspondence courses on the side. And you know, I was going through a whole metamorphosis. And so yeah, it for them that was quite a change. And at first they kicked against it, until one day I said, well, this is what I believe, this is who I am, and if you're not happy with me, I'll take my stuff and go. And I started packing my stuff. and then they cooled down and they let me be. So they actually, I must say, I've had wonderful parents. My dad is one of those typical farmers, you know, take you fishing and camping, and I have a lot of fond memories from my childhood. And my mom was a very good housewife. She was a nurse. She looked after cancer patients and stuff like that. So they were good people. And but when I lost my faith, of course, that was a bit of a shock to them. Well, it was a bit of a shock.
Because they weren't as passionate as you, and then you got super passionate.
And then I kind of pulled them up a little bit too, you know, so they also became a little bit more passionate about it, and especially my mother. And then when I lost all that, they couldn't understand. My mom it was a real crisis for her, because, you know, this idea that, oh, but now your son is going to burn in hell forever and ever. I don't think there's any parent who likes that idea.
No. That's very understandable.
Yes.
Have you talked to her about your thoughts on the hell doctrine?
I have attempted to discuss with them the whole thing about evidentialism, show them the problems in the Bible and stuff. But, you know, like most people, I've had friends who say to me, you know, I know there's problems. I can see the problems myself, but I like to believe it because it gives me comfort. And I don't have a problem with that. It's that they like to believe it, as long as they stay away from the bigotry and all those things. And it's...
What advice would you give to somebody who's in ministry or very much enthralled in religion? They're considering, you know, the flaws, and they're considering, you know, the flaws or the error, or I don't know, what advice would you give for somebody who would want to leave a situation like that once they start to see some of that unfold?
But yeah, you can, it depends on where you are as well. It depends on where you live. If you live in a Muslim country, it's probably not a bright idea to broadcast the fact that you just lost your faith two of my friends have lost their lives. It could be, if you live in a country like South Africa, yes, you could broadcast it, but you must realize your business is probably going to suffer under that. This is quote. It says, when an honest man discovers that he's in error, he either stops to be honest or he corrects his error.